And look, we're live. We're live. So for the folks who are going to be tuning in, if you're not tuned in yet, please go ahead and fall into this room. Today, we're going to talk about a very serious topic, something that hundreds, if not thousands, of District 3 residents have been reaching out to me about, and that's the topic of homelessness. If people were not aware, there was a recent study that was done, a report that was done by the office of our auditor in Courtney Ruby, talking about some of the impacts of homelessness and the fact that the city of Oakland does not have a plan. So we're going to dig a little bit into that, as well as the story of what's happening from a different level around mental health and illness that some of us know very closely from family members, loved ones, or just seeing it out in the community. So I'm gonna turn it over in just a second to Patricia. Patricia, there is a lot of background noise happening. I don't know if there's other folks that can kind of relax about what's going on in the background there, but I do want to open up the floor for you to talk about your experiences with homelessness as a provider. Talk to us a little bit about, what you think should change, the landscape. After we hear from Patricia, we're going to hear from.
My name's Katie.
Kate, why did they gave me the wrong?
That's okay. There's a Patricia that has a statement in the chat. That's why it's confusing.
I'm sorry, Katie.
That's fine.
Katie met with me, it's been a few months ago now, with a group of other women who wanted to talk about their stories in relationships with mental health and the need for a different type of services. And that's what Katie's going to talk to us about. I apologize, Katie.
Oh, that's fine. It's fine.
And then we're going to hear from folks from Alameda County, because that's another department in the city of Oakland that serves this community. And has a big chunk of the responsibility of dealing with homelessness in the city of Oakland and throughout the county. And then we're going to hear from James Van, former architect and just advocate for housing, not just for renters through the Oakland Tenants Union, but the unsheltered population in Oakland as well. So without further ado, Katie, please take it away.
That's okay. Hi, and thank you for having us. Myself, Katie, and another mom are here with FASME. We work with FASME, Families Advocating for the Seriously Mentally Ill. We are a young, very grassroots organization of families. I will start with a brief history of how we got to our current abysmal situation, and both of us will try to put a human face on the wrongs that we're all here to address. So let's start with some numbers. It's estimated that 30% of our unhoused neighbors have moderate to severe mental illness. This 30% holds true for our jails. Between 2014 and 2019, just 5 years, we have lost, not gained, over 2,200 licensed board and care beds for those with serious mental illness in Alameda County. And this is primarily due to gentrification and lack of adequate funding. And finally, since the 60s, we have lost 97% of our hospital beds. When we say serious mental illness, we are referring to the organic brain illnesses ranging on the psychotic spectrum from schizophrenia to bipolar to delusional disorder. These are our children. A disproportionate number of Black women and Black men are being 5150'd and incarcerated. This does not result in treatment, but instead the revolving door back to the streets so they relive again the very conditions that caused them to be 5150'd. We must break this cycle. We need treatment. We need supportive housing now. Without these basics, this cycle of pain and death will only continue to accelerate. So how did we get here? How did prisons become our mental hospitals and the cold, filthy streets, the beds of our loved ones? I'm going to start with World War II, when conscientious objectors were sent to work in the huge mental institutions of the day, and the conditions they saw and documented there were horrid. I refer you to a Life magazine expose titled Bedlam, 1946. The conditions were horrifying, but no more so than what we see in our streets. And the conditions for our folks in prison are medieval. There's a really good book called Crazy by Pete Early, if you want to read up on that. Following these revelations, we saw the introduction of the first antipsychotics, with high hopes that those with serious mental illness could now live successfully on their own. Kennedy proposed emptying the hospitals and replacing them with what he called community mental health centers, which, as we know, were never funded properly. There developed a counter-argument that doubted the existence of mental illness, an anti-psychiatry movement that continues today, and a patients' rights movement. And last but not least, when we got federal Medicare and Medicaid in the 60s, we also got the IMD exclusion, the Institute of Mental Disease Exclusion. This means the federal government will not reimburse states for the cost of psychiatric hospitals with more than 16 beds, though it will help with costs if they go instead to other types of community services. All of this has resulted in a decrease by 97% of locked hospital beds since 1955. Now, we're not advocating, we don't want a return to the conditions of the 40s. We don't want patients' rights to be eliminated. But as we often hear said, the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction. In an adequate mental health system with a continuum of care, hospitalization, when necessary, is an essential part of that care. We need more secure hospital beds and supportive housing tailored to the needs of the individual, and we need them now. I am a mother, and that's all I'm going to say about that. And I work in the mental health system. My job is working with the families of those with serious mental illness. That is part of a team we try to connect to mental health services. And let me tell you how very difficult this is. I laughed when I read in the recent Department of Justice report that they had asked people in John George if they would have accepted community services if these services had been offered to them. And they said yes. In reality, it's not like that. The very nature of the illness, when severe, prevents people suffering from psychosis to even know that they have an illness. Many of these folks are homeless, going in and out of jail, revolving through crisis stabilization. Many are still living with their families. The families call 911 or a crisis response team because they are bewildered and frightened and often in danger. But they're told that their child or mother or brother is just not yet sufficiently ill and dangerous to be hospitalized. Families have actually been told they want to see the blood first. Sadly, I am assisting an increasing number of families get restraining orders against their loved ones, thus criminalizing them and sending them to the streets. Why? Because that's what the police tell them to do. Why? Because there are not enough hospital beds to treat them and supportive housing for them to live in. Families are in danger, yes. In spite of what you may have heard, those with untreated, serious mental illness are more dangerous and more likely to kill themselves. It is incredibly difficult to have someone 5150, especially if they're living at home. It seems that if you cause a problem on the streets to the public or to businesses, then you are more likely to be taken to John George. And sometimes they use John George as a way to remove homeless people when there's too many complaints. I'll just, PES. But that doesn't mean you'll be hospitalized. People are taken to PES, which is for crisis stabilization. There it is hoped you will calm down and can be released right back to the streets you came from without any meaningful change. Hence the revolving door, John George, that we hear so much about. Keep in mind that out of 20 people, 5150'd and taken to John George Psych Emergency Services, only 3 are actually admitted into John George, the hospital, and then not for very long. Without enough treatment beds, we cannot find help in the form of a 5150 until our loved ones have reached a point where they are not just likely to hurt themselves or others, but they are on the very verge of doing it. And sometimes that help comes too late. We moms are speaking today because those we love cannot speak for themselves. Psychosis has often been romanticized, but let me tell you, as a mother, there is nothing quite like hearing your beloved son or daughter cry in pain and beg the voices tormenting them to stop. We stand by helplessly as our child slowly disappears into the illness and is lost from their place in this world with us. We need supportive housing and we need secure treatment facilities. There is no cheap, easy fix of the hole we've spent decades digging ourselves into. And I think I left out